To Utah Stories Top 5, where we scour all of the top headlines of the day and sift through all the spin and clutter and present to you the most important and pressing headlines, saving you countless hours. I'm your host for today, Allegra Zukowitz, and on today's Top 5 we have BYU-Idaho band's music professor from speaking and performing jazz after his disbelief in the LDS Church. Kevin Costner recalls how Southern Utah captured his imagination for filmmaking. Tim Ballard tells CPAC that Biden border agents have become sex trafficking delivery service. Utah House kills bill banning LGBTQ plus pride flags and political views from classrooms. Biden and Utah's governor call for less bitterness and more bipartisanship in nation's politics. But before we get to our headlines, be sure to smash that like button and subscribe to our channel. And today's episode is brought to you by Utah Stories Magazine. Did you know that just for $3 a month, you can have Utah Stories print magazine delivered right to your door? Utah Stories has been in print for nearly 20 years, and the reason people still love reading it on paper is that it is a very unique and fun, tangible way to experience the world around you. Screens might be taking over our consciousness, but print media will never die. Why? Because print offers a way to connect you in a real-world manner. Let's not undermine our real-world communities, believing that somehow online communities should replace them. Utah Stories is your connection to the real world. All right, let's dive into our first headline and story. BYU-Idaho bans music professor from speaking and performing jazz after his disbelief in the LDS Church. Ryan Nielsen, a nationally recognized professor of music at Utah Valley University, was pleased and proud when Brigham Young University, Idaho invited him to teach trumpet workshops and perform as a guest artist at a jazz festival on the Rexburg campus, according to the Tribune. Last week, Nielsen got a call saying his invitation had been rescinded. The faculty member that called him said the invitation had been rescinded because of his change of faith. The Tribune article said, at the festival, which went forward as planned Friday and Saturday, a BYU-Idaho alum distributed more than a dozen black t-shirts with the words, quote, "Ryan just wanted to talk about jazz," end quote. All right, moving on to story number 2, Kevin Costner recalls how Southern Utah captured his imagination for filmmaking. Utah's scenery plays a factor in Kevin Costner's new film, Horizon, which will hit theaters June 28th. Southern Utah's striking red vistas and meandering rivers captured the director's heart and imagination. Costner also thanked the people of Utah, many of whom worked on the film due to the Rural Film Incentives Plan previously passed by the Utah State Legislature, according to St. George News. Quote, "It was the best place in the world for me to go. I travel through the country and I always go through there," end quote, Costner said. "My head is on a swivel when I go through Utah. It's magic." He also said, "I kind of bypassed the smart business decision to go where my money could stretch farther. I didn't want to rob the audience of a second of what Utah is. The state has had an impact on me. I'll never forget Utah. Utah is where I wanted to be." All right, moving on to story number 3. Tim Ballard tells CPAC that Biden border agents have become sex trafficking delivery service. Tim Ballard, the embattled former CEO of Operation Underground Railroad, said Saturday that the Biden administration's U.S. Border agents have become a, quote, child sex trafficking delivery service, end quote, in one of his first public appearances since multiple lawsuits accused him of sexually assaulting a string of women, according to the Tribune. Ballard appeared on stage at the Conservative Political Action Conference in Washington during a Q&A session alongside the producer of Sound of Freedom, the movie loosely inspired by Ballard's efforts against sex trafficking. He said the film was repeatedly rejected by studios since it would, quote, force a conversation, end quote, people didn't want to have, especially about the southern border where tens of thousands of kids have disappeared into the belly of the United States, which is the number one consumer of child rape videos in the world. All right, moving on to story number 4. Utah House kills bill banning LGBTQ plus pride flags and political views from classrooms. Utah teachers will be free to display LGBTQ plus pride flags and other social, political, and religious imagery after the House blocked a bill this Monday. The Republican-led chamber defeated the proposal in a 39-32 vote as they raced to address hundreds of outstanding bills during the final week of the 2024 legislative session. both Democrats and Republicans criticized the bill's vague language and warned that it could stem important lessons in critical thinking, according to the Standard Examiner. Joe Briscoe, a teacher in Utah, said, "I did not find it my job as a teacher to ask my students to think in a certain way. I did believe as a teacher that it was my job to ask my students to think." Moving on to story number 5, Biden and Utah's governor call for less bitterness and more bipartisanship in nation's politics. President Joe Biden and Utah Governor Spencer Cox disagree on many issues, but they were united Saturday in calling for less bitterness in politics and more bipartisanship, according to the Daily Herald. Quote, "Politics has gotten a little too personally bitter," end quote, Biden said, who has practiced politics since he was elected to the U.S. Senate in 1972. Quote, "It's just not like it was," end quote. The Democratic president commented while delivering a toast to the nation's governors and their spouses as a black tie White House dinner in their honor. Governor Cox said to Biden that as state chief executive, governors, quote, know just a very little bit of the incredible burden that weighs on your shoulders. We can't imagine what it must be like, the decisions that you have to make, but we feel a small amount of that pressure, and so tonight we will honor you. Alrighty, moving on to the adventure of the day, candlelight concerts in Salt Lake City. One of my coworkers just went to that and said that the music was very incredible and that it is a lovely date night experience. So go check that out. Moving on to the question of the day, should housing be a human right? This article on the Westview discusses whether housing is a human right or not. A good quote from this article is, quote, "This is because housing is not a human right in Utah or Salt Lake City. Housing is not seen as a basic need. Instead, many of us are guilty of seeing housing as a good investment. We hope to buy when the market is favorable, and then we want our property values to go up. We want to maximize our home equity so that when we retire or we need to send a kid to college, we have a nest egg," end quote. You can check out more on that article on Westview's website. I think that housing is a complicated issue for people my age nowadays, considering that a lot of people that I know who are my age are debating whether they can even afford a house. So it's definitely an interesting topic. Comment down below on what you think about it. And then moving on to our announcement, Utah Stories is having a beer issue release party at Shades Brewing on March 15th from 7 to 9 p.m. Come by and have some delicious beer and enjoy our beer issue that is going to be out this Friday. So thank you so much for joining me today. Remember, if you like this content and you want to engage to it in a greater degree with your local community, go out and subscribe to either Utah Stories print magazine or a free digital newsletter. From utahstories.com, you can subscribe to our newsletter that offers all of the stories that we are covering in-house. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.